Continuation of Chapter 12. Destruction of Marriage and Family Life. Then comes the discussion of marriage. The communist system results in the destruction of family life. Undoubtedly, they have taken a step backwards because they weighed the disadvantages of what they had undertaken at first. But they do not want marriage and advocate free unions and concubinage. The children are brought up in governmental organizations and completely taken away from their parents. Pope Pius XI writes, quote, "Refusing to human life any sacred or spiritual character, such a doctrine logically makes of marriage and the family a purely artificial and civil institution, the outcome of a specific economic system. There exists no matrimonial bond of a juridico-moral nature that is not subject to the whim of the individual or of the collectivity. Naturally, therefore, the notion of an indissoluble marriage tie is scoured. Communism is particularly characterized by the rejection of any link that binds woman to the family and the home, and here emancipation is proclaimed as a basic principle. She is withdrawn from the family and the care of her children to be thrust instead into public life and collective production under the same conditions as man. The care of home and children then devolves upon the collectivity." End quote. They pushed this to the utmost limit, which created quite a few difficulties. So quietly, they let husband and wife live together and take back their children's upbringing somewhat. They realized that the situation they had created was so abnormal and that it encumbered them with so many tasks, picking up children, housing them to keep them from knowing their parents, that finally they backed away from their initial decision. Who would imagine putting into practice such unnatural things? The same thing was done in China in an odious manner. Quote, "Finally, the right of education is denied to parents, for it is conceived as the exclusive prerogative of the community, in whose name and by whose mandate alone parents may exercise this right." End quote. Constant surveillance. At school, it is still this way. They alone can teach. It is very difficult to give religious education to children. I do not know how things are in Poland, but in countries like Czechoslovakia and Hungary, they keep back all the children who go to catechism. They make trouble for the parents, take away their employment, reduce their salaries, harass them in countless ways. Everything is done to make the parents decide to withdraw their children from catechism. Nonetheless, they let a few catechism classes remain where the number of children attending is very low, because the parents have been persecuted so much that they finally succumb to the pressure. They allowed them uniquely to give the appearance of religious liberty for propaganda to the West, to make them believe that in the communist countries there is religious freedom and that religious education is given. Communications from truly Catholic priests, not the peace priests, inform us of the difficulties they encounter in getting the children to catechism and even the problems they have in exercising their ministry. There are always agents of the party present to listen to the sermons. In all the religious ceremonies, an agent of the party is present to note if any adverse comments on the government are made. It would be reported right away to the party bosses. The priests are summoned, interrogated, reprimanded, and even threatened. A Machiavellian Persecution. If they go out to visit the sick, bring the sacraments, permission must always be requested. They are authorized, but they are followed. They know where they are going and why. It is difficult for us to form an idea of such a Machiavellian persecution. Here is an example that illustrates the conditioning that is practiced by the communists. It did not happen in a communist country, or at least it had not been for long. I remember having received at Dakar the Archbishop of Conakry, Bishop de Milleville, who moreover has since been expelled by the communists. At that time, he was still Archbishop of Conakry, and the communists had been in power for about a year. He had received permission to come to Dakar. He came, he stayed with me. When I asked him questions, we too were alone together, and I asked him how he was. He hesitated to answer. A few days later he told me, "You know, it is incredible, but you are watched so much over there. You have such a strong feeling that someone is listening to your conversation, and that someone else will know what you have said, that soon you no longer dare to say anything. Coming here, when you were asking me questions, I felt that I was still under surveillance. I had the feeling that I was in a setting where I was not free." Unceasing Fear. This fear, this anguish that comes over you and finally never leaves, is terrible. Children no longer dare to speak to their parents. Parents are careful not to say anything against the party in front of their children, because afterwards the children may be interrogated. Inadvertently, the children may say that Papa or Mama said this or that, and this will immediately be reported to the party. Interrogations and prosecution follow. They are no longer really free to think. They endure a continual constraint. It is inconceivable that men should be foiled in every personal endeavor, and even in mind. It is monstrous. The Pope writes, quote, "What would be the conclusion of a human society based on such materialistic tenets? It would be a collectivity with no other hierarchy than that of the economic system. It would have only one mission, the production of material things by means of collective labor, so that the goods of this world might be enjoyed." End quote. Contrary to what communists claim, we must still wait. For the people who live under the communist yoke are far from obtaining the enjoyment of terrestrial goods. Having undertaken the destruction of the family, society disposes of an unlimited right. It possesses all the rights and can compel men to work. Banish God from the earth. Quote, "In a word, the communists claim to inaugurate a new era and a new civilization, which is the result of blind evolutionary forces, culminating in a humanity without God." End quote. Such is the goal of their society. Next comes a society without classes. In waiting to reach this goal, it is the state that holds all the power and is responsible for bringing about the ideal of the classless society. Quote, "Such, venerable brethren, is the new gospel which Bolshevistic and atheistic communism offers the world as the glad tidings of deliverance and salvation. It is a system full of errors and sophisms. It is in opposition both to reason and to divine revelation. It subverts the social order, because it means the destruction of its foundations, because it ignores the true origin and purpose of the state, because it denies the rights, dignity, and liberty of human personality." End quote.